So let's be honest, there are a lot of health and fitness studies out there which are really boring. We've got about 1 million confirming that yes, creatine does in fact do something. We've got about 100,000 telling us that protein is important. Another 10,000 or so confirming that training volume does in fact lead to more muscle growth, but only to a point. Then we've got 1,000 telling us that meal timing isn't important, except for when it is. 100 which tell us that taking a break from dieting makes us feel better. Crazy. And even 10 telling us that training through a full range of motion with some focus on lengthened partials builds more muscle than pumping out partial reps in the contracted position. Honestly, just most studies these days, I just don't find that interesting. However, the study that is the topic of today's video really got my attention. It really is interesting. And that's because it's looking at the mentality, the mindset of people that actually go to the gym. It compares bodybuilders to recreational lifters and the amount of satisfaction that they get from their bodies, how dangerous and how harmful of things they're willing to do to achieve certain things, and so on. Keeping in mind that I've been both part of the bodybuilder and the recreational lifter group, for me, this is super interesting. I've also got quite an interest and a bit of a background in psychology, so this study basically just hit the spot. To begin with, I'm going to talk you through the study in simple terms because they use some big words, and then I'll tell you why I personally think it's interesting. Okay, so let's run through the study, and the title is a good one, which I'm never going to remember, so I've got it written up on the screen here, and it is Muscle Size Satisfaction and Predisposition for a Health Harmful Practice in Bodybuilders and Recreational Gymnasium Users. In layman's terms, how happy are bodybuilders versus gym bros with their body, and how much stupid shit are they willing to do to achieve it? That pretty much sums it up. The aim of the studies was to look at the body satisfaction of bodybuilders versus people that just do it recreationally. Recreationally just means people are doing it for fun, to build a bit of muscle. There might be some social reasons, but nothing serious. You can think about the teenagers you see training in the gym together, the older guys who go in before or after work, and then the 20-something-year-olds that always seem to be there and you just think, do you not have a job? And that is in comparison to people who would consider themselves bodybuilders, actively competing in competitions and doing pretty much whatever they can to take their physique to that highest level. Just on hearing this, I already had some expectations on what the outcomes and results would be, and I'd be really interested to hear what your assumptions would be as well. So maybe before you listen to the rest of this video, drop your initial thoughts in the comment section below, because that would be really cool to see. And now we'll look at the actual findings of the study. Alright, so the study was in the form of a questionnaire, which isn't necessarily the most detailed, best type of study. However, it did allow them to get a lot of responses, which is really good, because not a lot of fitness studies actually ask a lot of people things. You're looking at small groups, whereas they got quite a few people here. And this was 23 questions in the questionnaire, and it was asking things along the lines of: how satisfied are you with your current levels of muscle mass? Reported anxiety over the loss of muscle mass, whether or not they trained when they were sick or ill, desired versus actual muscle circumferences, and so on, you get the idea. Like I said, they had a decent sample size for a fitness study of 132 participants answering the questionnaire. 51 of those were bodybuilders and the other 81 were the recreational lifters, so it wasn't too unbalanced. The outcome of the study was that 61.2% of people wanted to build muscle, which is 81 people, so that makes sense. And with those people that want to build muscle, there was a tendency towards not being satisfied with their current levels of muscle, which also makes sense. These people were also seen to be more preoccupied with their current levels of muscularity than people that were satisfied with their muscularity. They were more concerned about the shape of their body, and they were more likely to be motivated by obligatory motivation. Now, I've never heard of the term obligatory motivation before this study, so I can only assume it is being motivated to do something because you feel you have to, you feel obliged to do it. This would be in contrast to intrinsic motivation, where you feel this internal drive to want to do something. Instead, you feel like you have to do it. They also experienced more obsessive attitudes towards exercise. In that group of 80 people, the levels of these things were elevated in the bodybuilders compared to the recreational lifters, but the levels at which you were experiencing them within the bodybuilding cohort got lower the more experienced and the older the actual bodybuilder themselves were. So basically, the higher level and more experienced you are as a bodybuilder, the less you experience these negative effects, which is really interesting. They still displayed them at a higher level than the recreational group, but less than the inexperienced bodybuilders. Digging deeper, people who have actually entered a bodybuilding competition had 3.2 times higher levels of dissatisfaction with their muscle mass and a 4.8 times higher predisposition to doing health harmful practices to achieve their muscle gain. I assume this is talking about steroid use and extreme forms of dieting. This was self-reported and there weren't extra details, so I am just reading between the lines, but it would definitely make sense. Overall, bodybuilders had a clearly lower level of muscle mass dissatisfaction than recreational lifters. They had significantly higher rates of doing health harmful practices to achieve their muscle mass, and the lower level and less experienced the bodybuilder was, the worse these outcomes seem to be. Those are the main takeaways and conclusions from the study, and there's a lot more in there that I didn't go into detail on, but I want to keep this video concise and to the point on the topic of what I actually found interesting. If you are interested in all those extra details, I'll link the paper in the description, but for now we'll just move on and talk about why I actually find this study interesting. Like I said, I have an interest and a background in psychology, and this is all about the psychological effects, digging deeper into my biggest passion, so that's why I find it interesting. I find that difference between doing something recreationally and competitively really interesting, and I always have done, because there seems to be a huge gap here. For example, before I got into the fitness industry, I was really scared to get into the fitness industry because I was worried that it would ruin my love and passion for fitness. Luckily, it had the opposite effect, because now I'm just fucking obsessed, but it could have gone that way. And it does for some people. But anyway, there are a few things that I find interesting about this study, especially when you compare the bodybuilders within group from experienced and not experienced. So the first thing that I found interesting is the fact that bodybuilders are clearly less satisfied with their levels of muscularity than recreational lifters, even though it goes without saying that the bodybuilders have more muscularity than the recreational lifters. They are guaranteed to be more muscular, more impressive, probably leaner as well, yet they don't feel as good about themselves. Could this be because of who they're comparing themselves to, or maybe it's just where they actually want to be? For example, bodybuilders are probably comparing themselves to bodybuilders, whereas recreational lifters are probably comparing themselves to their mates in the gym. Maybe it's because they're doing harmful things like steroids and drugs to achieve a certain look, so they feel they should be getting more considering the risks that they are taking. Or maybe it's just a predisposition to not being satisfied with how they currently are. We don't really know, but it's interesting. Also, one thing to think about is that bodybuilders have this stigma of being overconfident, a little bit cocky, a little bit arrogant. What we see here is they're actually very insecure. The part on satisfaction changing as you become more experienced as a bodybuilder is interesting as well, but it actually makes a little bit of sense if you think about it. Less experienced bodybuilders are probably comparing themselves to these same people as more experienced bodybuilders, but the gap between them is probably about the same. If you've competed once, or if you've competed about 15 times, you still want to compare yourself to Chris Bumstead, but the difference between you is much different based on your experience levels, so the difference in satisfaction kind of makes sense. The fact that your typical gym bros are actually more satisfied with their physique surprises me, but also doesn't surprise me. They aren't exposed to the fitness industry and their crazy expectations within the fitness industry anywhere near as much, so their personal expectations will probably be lower. They also just don't work nearly as hard as actual bodybuilders do. And with muscle growth, there's huge amounts of diminishing returns. You get 80% of results from 20% of the work that you do, and then the extra 80% of the results of the work you do gets you just those last 20% of the results. So your gym bros are capitalizing on the 80% and only doing the 20%, and that's a pretty good deal, to be honest, if you ask me. It does surprise me that these guys still drop off, get bored, they lose consistency, because if you feel like you're good at something and you're getting good results and you're happy with it, that's usually very strong motivation. But maybe that's the reason why they're recreational when they're not bodybuilders, because they just don't care that much. or maybe they just don't enjoy it that much, and that's all okay. Overall, it's a super interesting study, and I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on the outcomes, if it was matching your initial assumptions, and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, this is self-reported, it's only a questionnaire, so the reliability isn't 100%, but I still find it about 100 times more interesting than another study on protein, meal timing, or creatine. In these questionnaire studies, people can perceive questions differently, people can lie, they can exaggerate, but nonetheless, pretty cool. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and please show your support to the channel by giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you as always for watching. Until next one, see you later guys.